This is a good thing,
yes,
Michael.
A lot of supporters on the side there.
From your camera, if that plane, VHT 199, spins around a little further, we'll have a clear shot of the door as it opens on your right-hand side of the screen for the viewers, the left-hand side of the plane. Yeah, we might well see him as they bring the stairs up to that door, and hopefully, as he steps off, we will get a glimpse of Mr. Assange returning after all this time and after all of these legal battles. This will be quite the moment.
So yes, indeed, Chris, it will. The engine's still at loud. Well, it's still at some height right now. They're going to start to wind back. In fact, that's happening right this second. Some of the ground crew heading over to that aircraft. It won't take long for them to pop the door on that private jet for Julian Assange to step out. It'll be interesting to see who comes first. Now, I'm looking out. Can't quite see it in the shot that we're seeing now because we're staying on the aircraft, but there are a few more people coming out from the main hangar area. No sign yet of Julian's wife or his father, but he will be given the opportunity to walk on Australian ground at some distance. There's no hiding this moment, nor should there be. This is a moment in our recent political and modern history of Julian Assange returning home, and he's going to be given that moment to parade himself, to be home, to show that he is home as well.
I don't know if you could see that, Michael, but the pilots just gave double thumbs up as they were looking out through the front windows there to the ground crew as they were assembling at the front. Double thumbs up from one of the pilots there. Touchdown, mission completed.
Well, that is a significant journey for them as well, the crew to bring this passenger home, a VIP in many, many ways, and the other VIPs on board as well. I mean, that's a mission for that flight crew as well, so no doubt the thumbs up means that they're relieved as well. But the most relieved man on board is Julian Assange. So,
okay, well, the doors have opened and the stairs descend, and we'll see, as you say, who comes out first. Looks like the pilots.
A small greeting party heading over as well. Looks like mostly officials. I can't quite make out the people. You might see it from a different angle to me from where you are, Chris, but about 4 or 5 people heading over there as well. There will be a matter of, there's some formality here too to do with customs as well, we should remember too. This is a plane touching down from an international journey. Customs by our security officers. There will be a little bit of procedure here, so some needed bureaucracy to happen, it being an international flight, albeit a private charter, before Julian Assange and the passengers on board are allowed to step out of there clearly and with some freedom.
And a little bit of breaking news here as well, Michael. We're just getting our people telling us that there won't be any appearance by Julian Assange at the WikiLeaks press conference this evening, sadly. It will only be attended by Stella, John Barry and Jen. Stella Assange, obviously Julian's wife, John his father, but no appearance by Julian. So this shot that we're about to see, hopefully, will be the only sign and sight of Julian Assange that we'll get this evening. When will he speak? It is a major question everybody's asking. I can promise you that every interviewer, every TV star in the world will be bidding and lining up to do this interview from across the world. Who will get the interview, I don't know. But a speculation that maybe Julian wouldn't want to do it that way, wouldn't want to do a traditional TV interview, that he might instead decide to do it through the WikiLeaks website and choose one of his own people to talk him through what will be a fascinating story. His time inside Belmarsh, his time inside the Ecuadorian embassy, the ordeals he's faced, how low he has been taken, the meeting of his wife in 2011, the marriage that was made from within the Ecuadorian embassy, his children not having been able to see them except at prison visits. It'll be a fascinating interview. Again, whichever side of the debate you are on, you will want to be watching it. It'll be fascinating.
Chris, what I might do now is bring in the independent politician Andrew Wilkie, who's been a huge champion of Julian Assange's right now. Andrew, we're going to stay on the vision of Julian about to get off that private jet, but talk to you as we see that vision as well. Describe this moment for me, please, Andrew.
Oh, this is truly a thrilling scene. You know, I'm one of millions of people around the world that have been working towards this point in time to see Julian come home, step on Australian soil, be safe and be reunited with his family. Remember, he's been in Belmarsh prison for 5 years. He was holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years. He was on parole with an ankle bracelet for 2 years. This is a man who, regardless of what you think about WikiLeaks, does have a remarkable story to tell and in my opinion, has suffered a terrible injustice.
Yeah. And, I mean, I don't know when the last contact you had with him was, Andrew, but this is obviously an interesting moment because it's a significant political moment. It's a significant family moment. There's a couple of layers of emotions happening here for Julian and his family tonight.
Oh, indeed. I can't even start to process what must be going through Julian's mind right now. I mean, I know there were times in Belmarsh prison where he had given up all hope. One of the reasons that so many of us tried to stop the extradition to the US was the professional medical advice that he was at risk of self-harming. You know, he reached the lowest of the low. The last time I saw, I've only seen Julian twice in my life, I should say, but the most recent time was in February 4 years ago in 2000 when I visited him in Belmarsh, and even then, although he was putting up a brave face, he was a much diminished man. He was clearly unwell and deteriorating, and that was 4 years ago. So you know, he's not in the best of shape. I think the most important thing will be for him to get an opportunity to well, not just to reunite with his family, get to know his kids, but to recover both physically and mentally. It is important to remember that the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture did officially liken in his report the virtual solitary confinement of Julian in Belmarsh as a form of mental torture. So it'll take him a long time to recover from that, I'm sure.
Andrew, what was the tipping point here? We were all surprised by the decision, but obviously this was being negotiated for some days, weeks, hours behind the scenes. What was the tipping point or the breakthrough moment that allowed this moment, Julian Assange returning to Australia, to happen?
Well, let's not forget that for many years a series of Australian governments were either disinterested or even hostile, openly hostile in their comments towards Julian Assange. The turning point was obviously the election of the Albanese government. Anthony himself has long been on the record as wanting this matter to come to a close. But it took a little while during the term of this parliament. I sensed there was division within the Labor Party. Remember, there are people on both sides of politics who have no time for Julian Assange. Even the Democrats in the US, you know, they still blame him for his reporting of the Democratic National Convention and the way that hurt Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump. So it took a while, I think, for the mood in Labor to shift. I think in part forced by the overwhelming public opinion and the change of public opinion, including from people who have no time for Julian, but they just, you know, they reached the view that this had gone on long enough. Even the opposition leader last year said as much. This had gone on long enough. If I had to identify a particular political moment when things clearly shifted, it was February this year when I moved a motion in support of Julian Assange in the House of Representatives, and it passed the House of Representatives 2-1. It had the support, overtly, it had the support, the vote of our Prime Minister and his Cabinet. And that seemed to be when the damn wall broke, that for the first time the Australian Parliament said publicly this had gone on long enough. And I think that was the turning point, if there was any one particular point. And from there, things just seemed to get moving.
And Andrew, is there significance in Julian coming into Canberra this evening? Obviously he'll want to meet with, no doubt, the Prime Minister and yourself, political leaders. But is there any extra significance of him coming in here and not somewhere, I guess, quietly with his family where he could disappear for a bit, as impossible as that might sound?
I think it does sound impossible. I hope someone's got a good plan to whisk him away, because he'll be probably followed around town by 1,000 journalists tonight. Look, I think it reflects the fact that ultimately it was the Australian government that got behind this and worked with the UK and US governments to pull off something in complete secrecy until yesterday morning when it broke in the Australian media. I mean, this is a highly complex logistical and legal manoeuvre that's been pulled off. So it makes sense to come to the nation's capital. I would be expecting our Prime Minister to meet with Julian tonight. I don't know when I and my colleagues will get a chance to talk to him. And the most important thing is not to talk to people like me. It's have a cup of tea with the PM, get to a hotel somewhere and just have a night with his family.
Oh, look, Andrew, you think about it, his two young boys, as our reporters have said during our coverage this evening, have only ever met him in prison. They've never got to hug their dad outside the walls of a jail.
Yeah, indeed. And look, I've got to know Stella over the years. I've been at a number of things and spoken to her a number of times, and she's the most wonderful person. I believe it's a wonderful little family, and that was one of the things that just seemed unfair, that after it had reached the point of being just ridiculous how long it was going on, it was just plain cruel to keep him from his family. I mean, I don't know why they couldn't have let him out for house arrest in London. It wasn't like he was dangerous. Instead, they had him in one of the UK's highest security prisons. I can tell you what Belmarsh is like. I've been there. It's a horrid place. It's where they put the worst of the worst, where they put murderers and terrorists. And they had a journalist there in virtually solitary confinement. I mean, it was just plain cruel and quite unnecessary. And I make the point that I'm in the camp that firmly believes that WikiLeaks is a publisher, Julian Assange is a journalist. He's got a Walkley Award in Australia, one of the top media awards that shows he's a journalist. And he's gone through this whole horrid episode for just doing his job. Who can forget some of that evidence he brought to light from about US misconduct in Iraq and Afghanistan, in particular that shocking video footage filmed from a US attack helicopter of US military gunning down Iraqi civilians and Reuters journalists. And he suffered on account of that, when I think he's actually just acted in the public interest.
We're speaking with Alan Wilkie, who helped champion Julian Assange's return to Australia, and Andrew Wilkie, I'm just describing to our viewers at the moment, whilst we stay on the vision of what we're watching here, Andrew, is the quite thorough, as we would expect, process of customs and biosecurity stepping onto that private jet, just having some words inside, going through the right paperwork, and some various other officials who are down at the bottom of the steps as well. So obviously no one's allowed off, private jet or otherwise. It's how you come into Australia. You go through the right processes to make sure that everyone's checked on the way in, and that is happening inside. I would presume over time that Julian's been allowed to keep a current Australian passport. He wouldn't have been allowed back here if that wasn't the case, and no doubt those provisions were put in place before he landed here tonight. But obviously two senior diplomats on board there too. We should mention and remind our viewers, Andrew, that Kevin Rudd's inside, and Stephen Smith, our US ambassador, and the British High Commissioner as well. So it's quite an escort home, isn't it?
It sure is, and it just goes to show that although it took a long time to get political support for busting Julian out of Belmarsh and getting him home, when the Australian government did pivot...
Stand by there, Andrew, please. Let's go to Anthony Albanese now, the Prime Minister, who's speaking.
Earlier tonight, but you probably knew this, Julian Assange was reunited with his family here in Australia. His arrival home ends a long-running legal process. A plea agreement between Mr Assange and the United States Department of Justice was accepted by a US court in Saipan earlier today. I do want to express my appreciation to the United States and the United Kingdom for their efforts in making this possible. As Prime Minister, I have been very clear that regardless of what you think of his activities, Mr Assange's case had dragged on for far too long. I have clearly and consistently, at every opportunity and at every level, advocated for Mr Assange's case to be concluded. I am very pleased that this saga is over. And earlier tonight, I was pleased to speak with Mr Assange, to welcome him home, and had the opportunity to ask about his health. and to have my first discussion with him. His safe return.
Rightio, let's just leave the Prime Minister there. We're starting to see people come off the plane right now and walk over, some of the other passengers who are on board and some of those officials who got on board there from Customs and Border Security. They are heading over away from the plane right now. So there's a lot of movement. There is Julian Assange right now. And a cheer from the crowd as well. Julian Assange there dressed in a suit. A confident stride across the tarmac there from Julian Assange. He can hear his supporters cheering out to him, a wave for them as well right now. There is one relieved man back on home soil after 15 years, and a fight where once he thought he might end up in American prison for 137 years. Acknowledging his supporters once again there, heading up the stairs there into the side of the hangar. That is quite an incredible moment of Julian Assange returning home, setting foot on Australian soil. Just pausing for a minute here now too, to look back over to the supporters and then being escorted inside there. Another wave. That is a jubilant man. That is a very happy man to be home after what he has endured. And a huge embrace there. Beautifully and warmly embraced. So much happiness here from the supporters too that I can see. That is quite an incredible moment there of Julian Assange returning home. Hugs for his father, hugs for the supporters there, his wife as well. Welcome home, they're screaming out. Welcome home. Two hands in the air there from Julian Assange again. And then being taken. No, he's coming back over to the edge of the veranda there, fully acknowledging all of the people that have stuck with him for so long. Even the crews on the ground here are honking their horns as Julian Assange heads in there. Out of the cool Canberra night, inside. Another way for the supporters there as well. Absolutely acknowledging all of the support that they gave him and thanking them, and very relieved to be home. Chris Reason, that's quite an extraordinary moment there.
Michael, it happened exactly as the world's press had asked it to happen, that we might be able to see Julian step on Australian soil, but it went further than that, much further. Perhaps you couldn't see, but that immediate embrace, the first embrace and that passionate kiss on the lips, let's just say it, was for his wife, Stella Assange, as she came out and gave him the biggest and most generous of hugs. What an incredible moment. The two of them almost inseparable there. Just wonderful to watch. And followed by Jen Robinson, who's Australian long-time lawyer who has fought long and hard. She too collapsed into Stella's arms. This is the end of the road of a very difficult and challenging road that they've been travelling together now for years. Australia just got to share that moment, and that was pretty generous of the family to do that. Stella could have stayed inside. Again, I think their way of saying thank you, their way of showing publicly and pictorially that they're back in the country, that Julian is safe, that they are together and that there's work to be done. And they want to say thank you, and they've said it in that way. 7:55 p.m. was the moment I marked down that Julian stepped off the steps of that plane and onto Australian soil, onto that old RAF airbase at Fairbairn there, made his way across and into the arms of his wife. Married since 2011, and as we've said a couple of times now tonight, a union that basically took place and has evolved through the Ecuadorian embassy and the Belmarsh prison. Now it's allowed to be enjoyed in complete freedom back on Australian soil as we play these shots again. Julian there, taking that first step, thanking the pilots and crew that got him to Australia safely.
Yeah. Chris, I want to bring back in Andrew Wilkie as well, who's been watching this with us and a huge supporter of Julian Assange, and we'll play those moments again as Julian stepped off the plane. Andrew, your thoughts, your reflections on this magic moment?
Oh, it is a magic moment. I mean, it's sad that someone has endured or had to endure so much, but it's It's wonderful that he survived it. Of course, in some ways, though, there's a lot of unfinished business here. I mean, it's unfortunate that Julian was forced to plead guilty to an offence earlier today in an American court. I'm sure he didn't want to plead guilty to anything because he doesn't regard himself, and I don't regard him as guilty of any offence. But of course, he had no option. It was either plead guilty or he'd end up in America, probably. Or quite possibly. What that means then is that now in America there is a precedent for a journalist being not only charged but convicted for doing their job. Now that's in contravention of the US Constitution. It's an alarming precedent for journalists, I think, in any number of countries. There is a presumption of freedom of speech in Australia. There's a presumption of freedom of the media. It's in the US Constitution that there's freedom of speech and freedom of media. But we now have this precedent. I mean, you expect journalists to be persecuted in authoritarian regimes, but you don't expect journalists to be convicted of an offence in a country like the US. So, I think it just puts the pressure or the weights on people like me to push harder that at least in Australia we enshrine media freedom, and we do what we can on the international stage to campaign for media freedom. There's something like 500 journalists around the world are currently imprisoned for acting as journalists and reporting the news. That's not the building block of a healthy democracy. We need whistleblowers, we need people to speak up, we need the media to be free to report it. There's still more work to be done here, despite the fabulous news today. Just absolutely thrilling news that Julian Assange is at home in Oz with his wife. And I don't know if his children are in Australia. I hope they're in Australia. But if they're not, he'll be reunited with them soon enough too, I'm sure.
Yeah. Indeed. Andrew, good words there. And keep fighting that fight for media freedom too. Hear from all of us in what we do in our craft of journalism. It's often under attack. Julian Assange has certainly suffered that for far too long. And those wonderful moments there that we're just replaying, I love it all. And the crowd here was just absolutely gorgeous too. They've come out, they've been waiting in the cold, and Julian Assange waiting to... And giving it two hands up in the air as much as he could, and a fist pump every now and then to thank them for their support as well. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us and helping us narrate some of this incredible moment of Julian Assange returning home in full view for everyone. And we would hope now he gets some private moments with his family as well. We had to interrupt the Prime Minister there, regrettably, but he was talking at this exact moment when Julian Assange was returning home as well, but he was certainly reflecting on the very strong diplomatic and political manoeuvring that had gone on behind the scenes to help bring Julian Assange home, an Australian back on Australian soil, which is quite something. Let's have a look at the, actually, as I mentioned, the Prime Minister, he still is talking, I understand. We might just have a quick listen to see what Anthony Albanese is saying.
With the United States, I regard President Biden as a friend. I regard the relationship as being absolutely central, one of the three pillars of our foreign policy here, along with our relationship in the region and our support for multilateral forums, including the United Nations. I engage, one of the things that I do, one of the reasons why you get outcomes is I don't come into press conferences and talk about the personal details of discussions I have.
I was going to ask whether there was a breakthrough moment or a particular turning point in these negotiations, a moment when you realised that it would be possible.
I think there were probably a number of steps along the way, to be frank.
Can you tell us anything about them?
There were moments when this required a range of decisions to be made by the Department of Justice in the United States, which of course is not subject to political influence. They're independent. If you look at the whole range of people who've been to the United States, I'm surprised that some of it was missed by the people in this room. Some of the visits, but not up to me to indicate that. Go back and have a look at some diaries and who's travelled to the United States in recent months. We wanted to be focused on an outcome. And these things don't come together till they all come together. You know, there are steps it required. A plea deal requires a two-sided agreement between the Department of Justice and Julian Assange. It requires, in this case, Mr Assange to receive advice from his legal team, and we have been in contact with his legal team over a period. He had a legal team in the UK led by his longest legal advisor, Jen Robinson, who was the conduit for direct discussions with Mr Assange, but he also had a very good legal team in the United States. Kevin Rudd worked very hard, as did Stephen Smith, as did the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, as did the Attorney General, as did others as well, to achieve. Karen.
Prime Minister, the point's been made that your predecessors did not advocate for this outcome and that you have chosen to do so, and you've talked a bit about why you did that. But you've personally been very engaged since before you were even opposition leader with this. So can you tell us why you have chosen to stake so much on this, given the US relationship is so important and it must have put things under pressure at times? Why go so hard for this outcome for someone who, as you have made the point, divides the population in terms of what he did?
I believe in standing up for Australian citizens, and I make that very clear. I made it clear from the beginning. I had the same position as opposition leader on all of these issues as I've had as Prime Minister. And as Prime Minister of Australia, you have an opportunity to make a difference. I've said repeatedly across a range of areas, I'm not here to occupy the space. I'm not here necessarily to ensure that people will always be supportive by going through the details of what we are doing as we are doing them. And some people have been very critical that we weren't doing enough. What we were doing was exactly the right thing to achieve an outcome. I'm an outcomes-based politician. I believe in making a difference. We can make a difference. The United States are our friends. The United States was, of course, in a position, though, where because of the separation of powers, I believe in that as well, and have always understood that due to their system. So it wasn't as simple as me sitting down with President Biden or any other US elected representative and achieving this outcome. Diplomacy is something that must be patient, something that must be built on trust, something that works through stages. We have done that, and Mr Assange and I this evening, as I said, I've never met Mr Assange. I had a very warm discussion with him this evening, though. He was very generous in his praise of the Australian government's efforts. The Australian government stands up for Australian citizens. That's what we do. Thanks very much.
All right. There's the Prime Minister there speaking in Canberra, just a short distance away in Parliament House, as we've been replaying those momentous images of Julian Assange returning home, hugging his wife, hugging his father, thanking his supporters, and raising his hands in the air, raising his fist in the air more than once as he took that what seemed like not a great amount of distance, but quite a long walk across the tarmac there from the private jet into the hangar, and some now private moments being enjoyed by the Assange family and the various lawyers and supporters around them. Annie Puller, my colleague's been standing by at one of the hotels where the family is staying in Canberra. Annie, early in the evening you saw the family leave there to come here. Have they returned there yet? What are you seeing?
Michael, they haven't returned yet, but we have found a couple of loyal supporters here. I want to bring over Graham. Graham, you've worked on the Free Julian Assange campaign for what, over a decade now?
Oh, 2006, I reckon.
So you've been with him every step of the way through this legal battle?
Well, I haven't been by his side, but I've been in public place advocating for him.
And what's brought you here tonight?
I want to see his live face, right? I've never met the man in person. Now's the time. He's come back to Australia. Australian hero.
You see him as a hero?
Absolutely. He took on what a brave thing to do. Criticise the US. Speak loudly and truthfully about its war crimes. Bang, he got done over. He went from being globally, really well known. He was a hero of the times, and then he was smeared. And the media, you guys, treated him badly. Yeah.
I guess against all odds, he's landed now. He's taken on one of the most powerful governments in the world. Did you think he could do it, and did you think he would reach this moment?
I think we could do it. We, the people, could do it. Backing Julian, we've done it.
And it's been a collective effort, hasn't it?
Massive effort. I think the support for Julian grew recently. It's currently about 98% Australians, when asked, what do you feel about Julian Assange? They'll say, time to bring it for an end. The boring Albanese. But we'll say, free the man. He's a hero. Decorate him.
Yeah, his father said if it wasn't for the unity of the Australian public, the government and Parliament, this plea deal would never have happened and we wouldn't be seeing the newfound freedom that Julian Assange has. Michael will be standing by for when Stella and Julian's father are expected to arrive here at the hotel, probably in the next 20 minutes or so. We'll come back to you.
Indeed, Annie, thank you. And through WikiLeaks as well, we've learned that they will be doing an interview later on this evening as well. They'll be talking publicly. Chris Reason, let's bring you back in now at the desk in Sydney, our chief reporter. Look, I just make note of one small thing. I think along the way that we lost some passengers. We did see Kevin Rudd and Stephen Smith in that jet earlier before it left to come to Australia, but didn't appear to emerge from the craft. From what I could see anyway, you might have had a better angle on that.
No, I didn't see either reason.
Separate ways.
They might well have gone, as the camera was panning, with the man of the moment, Julian Assange. Maybe Mr. Smith and Mr. Rudd went the other way to leave Mr. Assange to have his moment there. The people I did see in the frame of the shots were, of course, front and centre. There he is, Julian Assange, followed by his lawyer, who's been standing by his side for so many years now, Jennifer Robinson, and also surprisingly, Barry Polak, his US lawyer, attorney that has been with him in recent years throughout this. And, of course, we saw him at the court in Saipan today as well. I didn't expect him to be flying back down to Australia. These people are going to be reunited and they will be, I'm sure, looking forward to a major celebration together in the coming hours, if not days. But, Michael, I just want to bring you up to speed as well. While we were taking those shots, those all-important shots of Mr. Assange coming off the plane, we, of course, had to cut away with great apologies to the Prime Minister as he was talking there, but we went back to him. But some of the stuff we've missed, Rob Scott in our Canberra Bureau was across that press conference and has sent some notes in just to talk about what we did miss and some interesting facts that Mr. Albanese revealed from that conversation. He said that he was talking to Mr. Assange as the wheels of the jet touched down. Now, I took notes there. It was 7:37 p.m. when it hit the tarmac. So Mr. Albanese was the first person to be welcoming Mr. Assange into the country when his jet did touch down. He said he welcomed him home. He asked about his health. He said that this was his first discussion with him. He hasn't met him before. Julian revealed to the Prime Minister that he was looking forward to playing with his sons, most of all, on arrival. We didn't see them tonight, quite rightfully too. We believe they're either back at the hotel or perhaps even in that hangar there behind you. He also said that Assange had told him it was a surreal and happy moment as he touched down. So some insights there, provided courtesy of our correspondent, Anthony Albanese, holding a press conference just a few minutes ago.
Chris, there's an interesting proposition now with Julian Assange back in our country. And yes, our political leaders right up to the Prime Minister have helped him a lot. But now based in Australia, if he continues his work in journalism, he could become quite an agitator on the political scene if he wanted to. He's a bit of a touchstone, if you like, for whistleblowers and people who want to leak information. Julian Assange, as a resident journalist in this country, may make some headlines of his own still to come.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, Michael. It is just the beginning for Julian Assange. Let's put aside tonight, put aside this coming days, perhaps even weeks, as he gets his health together, gets reunited with his family, gets to know his boys, his wife again. But make no mistake, the WikiLeaks editor spoke to us today and said that he believes Mr Assange will be back on the tools, back into doing what he does with WikiLeaks in the coming months and years. You're absolutely right. He will be one of the key figures in great demand across the planet, not just Australia, in coming years. The mind boggles to think what he could charge for after dinner speaking, for getting corporates together, for actually pushing his agenda, his thoughts, his views, and doing that sort of work as well. He could raise an inordinate amount of funds for WikiLeaks and his organisation that he, of course, co-founded all those years ago. But you would think that first and foremost, one of his primary career objectives would be to get his advocacy and his journalism, as he calls it, as his activism, as many journalistic friends of mine call it, back on track, and he will be working again. There's no doubt about it.
Chris, of course, we're watching these moments of celebration here in Australia with Julian Assange returning onto home soil. But in America, it's a red-hot political environment right now, particularly leading into their election. There will be a lot of conservative Republican politicians who hate these moments this evening and believe that Julian Assange should have been taken to their country and faced all of those charges that at one point the US Justice Department were trying to level against him, which had a capacity at one point, I think, of 137 years in jail if found to be true. So you'll have that side of politics who won't be viewing these scenes tonight with the great delight that we are here.
And that side of politics led in the last 24 hours by the former Vice President, Mike Pence himself, who's been quite actively using social media channels to express his displeasure, in fact his disdain and anger with what has happened with this plea deal negotiated by the Justice Department. And everyone in America thinks it's been done by the Biden administration. The administration has been clear to say it wasn't them, it was Justice Department. We all know there's something in between there, but there are a lot of people in the States who consider Mr Assange as nothing more than a traitor. And indeed, here in Australia as well, we've seen in the last 24 hours comment from former Special Forces soldiers who work for the SAS, the Australian SAS, who say the same thing. They believe that what he did back in 2010 with the release of that extraordinary tranche of documents, we're talking 400,000 of them, put in jeopardy the lives of thousands of allied personnel, US and Australian and British. Let me just quickly reflect back on the court case today. There's been lots of glowing, touchy-feely stuff about Mr Assange's steps to freedom. But in that courtroom as well, there was a US lawyer for the US government, Matthew McKenzie, and he reminded the court of what Mr Assange was accused of doing, what he'd done. He'd published on WikiLeaks 75,000 Afghanistan war reports, 400,000 Iraq war reports, Guantanamo detainee reports, 100,000 US state government cables. The list went on, and he said that many within America still hold Mr Assange accountable for doing that. Now, the counter-argument, as we've reported in weeks and years, is that there has been no proof that anybody suffered or was killed as a result of those leaks, but people argue it's the theory of what he did. He went and released all those documents without vetting them, without checking them, without balancing them, and they were all put online and jeopardising, exposing names, addresses, spies, personnel who are working overseas in espionage roles, suddenly exposed, suddenly having to be extracted and moved around again. Yes, he did some extraordinarily good stuff. The stuff that Andrew Wilkie referred to before with the Apache attack helicopter, no question, American war crime. Amazing story. That's where it began in 2010. But the thousands of documents that leaked after that were the ones that became so much subject of so much fury.
Yeah. Chris, hold your post there. You rightly mentioned Rob Scott gave you a précis of what the Prime Minister said when we had to cut away from him. Rob is back in our Canberra bureau now. I might just cross to him and have a brief chat about some of the comments that we didn't quite hear on air. from the Prime Minister, who in the later part of his press conference, when we went to it, sounded, if I can characterise it this way, a little combative perhaps about some of the questions that were being put to him and or explaining what was going on behind the scenes. Rob, just give us an idea of what the Prime Minister's take on all of this was, and that quite curious decision to call Julian Assange on the plane before touching down. Just go through that.
Yeah, he said that he was the first person in Australia to speak to Mr Assange exactly the same time as his wheels hit the ground. That was a carefully choreographed phone call. He wanted to be the first person to speak to him. He said that Mr Assange thanked him and the people he called the diplomatic A-team. That's Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister, now the US Ambassador, and also Stephen Smith, our UK High Commissioner, for all their work behind the scenes in making this day a reality. He said that this has been a long time coming, that this is the result of patience, carefully calibrated behind-the-scenes work by him and his government. He says he has raised this, advocated for Julian Assange at every opportunity, at every level, saying that he spoke to Joe Biden in person about this at the NATO summit in Madrid. He said that diplomacy is something that has to be worked on. It's based on trust and it takes a long time. And just back to that conversation with Julian Assange, he said that he, as Chris Reason explained, is really looking forward to spending some time with his children, his sons, playing with them. You saw that hug and that kiss to his wife. Clearly, they have missed out on a lot and he is very happy to be home. The Prime Minister relieved that this has now been brought to an end. He says he believes in standing up for Australians, and no matter what people think about Julian Assange, he thinks that this case has dragged on for far too long. There was nothing to be gained from his ongoing incarceration.
Rob, will we see the Prime Minister and Julian Assange together in the next day or so?
Well, he was very cagey when he was asked about that. He was asked directly, are you going to be meeting Mr Assange tonight, tomorrow? He wouldn't answer directly, except to say that he is aware of Mr Assange's movements over the next couple of days, and saying it's up to Mr Assange whether he wants to make a public statement. So I think you can read between the lines there that a meeting is inevitable. He just doesn't want to make it public because he wants to afford Mr Assange all the opportunity to speak publicly at a time of his choosing. But I think that is definitely going to happen.
Yeah. Rob, as we've been speaking to, I should add for everyone watching that there doesn't seem to have been any movement of Julian Assange and his team around him from the airport yet. They went inside the hangar after those wonderful moments as they emerged from the charter plane, and they've been having a quiet moment inside just to, I guess, sit, reflect, work out what's going on. And there's been some people gathering at the gate on the other side, so we'll expect them to leave pretty soon. Half their luck, they're inside warm. Outside here, it is absolutely freezing. It is a chilly night in Canberra, so wherever they go, they'll be wanting to get into the warmth once they leave this base right now. But, Rob, I raised the question before also. It's a minor point, but of curious note was the fact that we had the US Ambassador Kevin Rudd and also Stephen Smith, the British High Commissioner, unless they slipped out the back way. I'm not too sure they were on the plane, or if they were, we just didn't see them, but they played a pivotal role in all of this as well.
They absolutely did. As I said, Mr Assange described them as the diplomatic A-team. And actually, during that press conference with Anthony Albanese not long ago, he says he is going to be meeting with both of them to talk all things AUKUS and every other matter to do with our relationship with the United States and the United Kingdom. So whether they were on that plane or not, they are obviously in Australia and will be holding those meetings with Mr Albanese very, very soon. Interesting as well, as part of that press conference, he said, unquestioned, he just came out with this information that the Australian government feels the proper protection of all national security info is vital for security. So perhaps not agreeing with what Julian Assange did, but outright saying that, we need to protect our secrets. But no matter what you think of what Mr Assange has done, his case needed to be brought to an end. Let's have a little listen to some of that press conference that took place a few minutes ago.
Earlier tonight, but you probably knew this, Julian Assange was reunited with his family here in Australia. His arrival home ends a long-running legal process. A plea agreement between Mr Assange and the United States Department of Justice was accepted by a US court in Saipan earlier today. I do want to express my appreciation to the United States and the United Kingdom for their efforts in making this possible. As Prime Minister, I have been very clear that regardless of what you think of his activities, Mr Assange's case had dragged on for far too long. I have clearly and consistently, at every opportunity and at every level, advocated for Mr Assange's case to be concluded. I am very pleased that this saga is over. And earlier tonight, I was pleased to speak with Mr Assange to welcome him home and had the opportunity to ask about his health and to have my first discussion with him. His safe return to Australia, we know.
OK, we're just coming back out of Albanese there. We just saw another shot of Julian Assange, actually. He came back to get what looked like some hand luggage, some baggage. I'm just trying to look around the corner as well. But Julian Assange came back out of the hangar area, the space to the side of it, and has been met by a few more of the officials around here and grabbed some luggage. So clearly just taking their time here to get everything sorted before they leave this space, because once they leave here, a whole new world starts for Julian Assange. A lot of attention on him and his family as well. Even though they'll want some quiet time, they will also be in the spotlight. There's no doubt about that. Chris Reason, I know that you're still there. Before we end our broadcast, I might just come bring you in for some final thoughts as well. That was a curious moment, actually. We thought that Julian Assange might have been loading up the cars to get on out of here, but there's obviously just the mundane task of grabbing your bags as you've got off the flight and making
jumping
sure
back on
that
the
they're
plane
all
and
there.
flying back to Sydney. Well, it raises an interesting point. I'm still trying to work out why the plane came to Canberra. I always thought that if it was going to be arriving here, then that would imply that he was going to be meeting with the Prime Minister, or at least the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong. The fact that he hasn't makes me question why. 24 hours ago, his wife, Stella Assange, was in Sydney at a hotel here and tweeting happily from in front of the Opera House. All the indications were they were going to come back to Sydney. It didn't happen. They've gone to Canberra. There hasn't been a Prime Ministerial moment. There hasn't been a Foreign Minister moment. Why did they go there? I guess we can take stock of the fact that the government was technically paying for this plane, even though Assange has promised and WikiLeaks has promised to pay back that staggering bill. And perhaps the thought was, well, we'll get Mr Rudd and Mr Smith back here to Canberra and Mr Assange can work his own way home. But I'm scratching my head about that one. One other quick point as well. A lot's been said by Mr Albanese about the diplomatic negotiations that have been going on. No question. Extraordinary. They've been going on for a long time. They've been successful. The outcome has been wonderful for Assange and his supporters today. But I'm a bit of a realpolitik kind of guy and look at this sort of thing. What did it cost Australia to get Mr Assange back? Usually there's a lot of horse trading that goes on with these sorts of negotiations. I'd love to know what Australia's put up to make this one come out with this fairy tale ending for Mr Assange. It has been, as Jennifer Robinson said earlier today when she came outside of court with Julian after he was made a free man, a historic day, she said, and her American attorney colleague Barry Polak saying he hoped that no other journalists would ever have to go through this again. Well, I guess we'd all agree with that from the journalistic side. But history indeed, and seen here live tonight. Michael.
Also be a certain thing about a certain football game on tonight between two states, and perhaps the Prime Minister wanted to get his message out of the way and have no big image tonight. In the next day or so, I'd be very surprised if we didn't see Julian Assange standing side by side with the Prime Minister in the halls of Parliament House, or somewhere significant as well, to formally welcome him home, to say some thanks. And I'm sure that Julian Assange wants to thank him as well. It would be disconnected if the two weren't seen in the same frame at some point or other.
Yeah, I agree, Michael, and I think that that is more than likely. Maybe Mr Albanese has decided to give them their space tonight, and to be frank, we know that eyeballs of Australia will be watching something else, not Mr Assange. So politically, probably better to let it happen tomorrow in front of lots of cameras when there's lots of attention, and to give Mr Albanese and his ministers the credit that they do deserve for having engineered this so efficiently.
All right, Chris, good to have you with us tonight and helping anchor, I should say, of the return home of Julian Assange. I appreciate that. Also to Annie Puller, Rob Scott and to Serena Andaloro for holding down the fort outside here at the RAF Air Base, where it's been pretty chilly tonight. Good to have your company, though. A moment we thought we should share with you tonight, the return of Julian Assange onto Australian soil. Thanks for your company. Good night.